What did it actually take to outfit a Roman centurion for battle? This is a guy who wore a helmet designed to make him the most obvious target on the field, legally beat his own soldiers with a stick, and still marched right to the front of 80 men going into combat. Today we're going through every single item he actually carried, and by the end you're going to understand exactly why Rome kept winning for centuries. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Helmet. Every legionary on that field wore a helmet, but the centurions had one thing nobody else had. His horsehair crest ran sideways across the top of his head instead of front to back, and that's called the transverse crest. Now think about why that actually matters. You've got thousands of men crammed together, shields smashing, arrows flying, total chaos in every direction, and his soldiers needed to find him right now. That sideways plume was the answer. It turned him into a human landmark you could spot from 50 meters away in the middle of all of it. Here's the catch, though. The same thing helping his own men find him also told every enemy archer, every javelin thrower, and every opposing commander exactly who to aim at, and he wore it anyway because that was the job. The centurion wasn't hiding anywhere. He was standing exactly where his men needed him to be, and the helmet was built to handle the consequences of that. Cheek guards stopped side cuts, the neck guard stopped downward blows, and the curved bowl was designed to make weapons slide off rather than land clean. So instead of a cracked skull, you're walking away with ringing ears. In ancient warfare, honestly, that's a pretty solid outcome. Chapter 2. The Armor. Next up is the body armor, and this is where it gets interesting because a centurion actually had a choice that regular soldiers didn't. Legionaries wore whatever they were issued, and that was that. A centurion had options. Option 1 was the lorica segmentata, those overlapping iron strips you've probably seen in every Roman movie ever made. It was built from horizontal iron plates across the chest and shoulders, held together with leather straps and brass fittings, and it was genuinely hard to punch through. Sounds great, right? Except maintaining it was a nightmare. The leather straps inside rotted from sweat and rain, constantly soaking in. Rust crept into every gap between the plates, and keeping the whole thing functional was basically a part-time job on top of everything else a centurion was already dealing with. Option 2 was lorica hamata, chainmail made from thousands of linked iron rings, and this is what veterans almost always went with. It was heavier on the shoulders, but it moved with you completely. You could march in it, dig in it, fight in it, and a well-maintained set could honestly last for decades. Either way, a centurion's armor came reinforced beyond what regular legionaries were getting, because he wasn't sitting safely in the middle of the formation. He was at the front, and if he went down, the men behind him were in serious trouble fast. Chapter 3. The Secret Layer. Under all that iron was the subarmalis, a thick padded jacket of linen or leather, and I know that doesn't sound exciting, but hear me out. Without it, metal armor sitting against bare skin on a 20-mile march is genuinely brutal. Every step bruises you, every hit against the armor sends the full force straight into your body. The subarmalis absorbed all of that, so a centurion could actually show up to a battle ready to fight instead of already half-wrecked from the journey. Nobody makes statues of the padded jacket, but take it away and the armor above it stops being protection and starts being the problem. Chapter 4. The Arm Guard. Rome built after getting humbled. Check this out because this item has a story behind it that tells you everything about how Rome actually operated. The manica was a segmented metal arm guard covering the entire sword arm from shoulder to wrist, and for most of Roman history it simply didn't exist. The right arm was just trusted to the shield. That worked fine until Rome ran into the Dacians, who were using a weapon called the falx, a curved blade sharpened on the inside edge, designed specifically to hook over the top of a Roman shield and drive straight down into the arm underneath. It was taking limbs off at the shoulder in a single blow. Rome lost good men to it before doing what it always eventually did, found the problem, built the fix, moved on. The manica appeared, the falx stopped being nearly as effective overnight, and that was that. Every piece of Roman armor tells a story like this. Somebody got hurt, Rome paid attention, and now that weakness doesn't exist anymore. Chapter 5. The Sandals. Before we get to the weapons, we need to talk about the sandals, and yes, I'm serious. Roman soldiers were out here marching across the ancient world in sandals and no, not casual vacation footwear. The Kalagai were open leather sandals with thick ankle straps and heavy soles packed with iron hobnails called clavi. The open design sounds completely wrong until you think about what these soldiers were actually doing every day, marching through heat, mud, rivers, and rough terrain for 20 miles, and closed boots trap moisture, which causes blisters, which causes infection, which takes men out of the campaign before the enemy even sees them. The open design kept feet breathing and drying out, which kept soldiers functional for entire seasons instead of a few weeks. The hobnails gave grip on slippery terrain, made an intimidating sound when thousands of men marched together, and when enemies went down in front of the formation, those iron studs turned every step forward into a weapon. Grip, endurance, intimidation, and weapon all in one sandal. Come on, that's genuinely impressive. Chapter 6. The Belt. The cingulum was the military belt, and this thing was doing way more than just holding up gear. Only serving soldiers were allowed to wear one, so it was an immediate visible signal of exactly who you were. For a centurion specifically, the way he wore it communicated his rank without a single word spoken. Regular legionaries carried the sword on the right hip, and a centurion carried his on the left. That's literally the whole difference. And in a military culture completely obsessed with visible order and rank, that detail was readable from across an entire formation instantly. The belt also carried the Pugio dagger on the other side, and hanging off the front were leather strips studded with metal rivets that clacked together rhythmically whenever the soldiers moved. Zero protection against weapons, but when 1,000 men marched together, that sound carried a serious distance. By the time the enemy heard Rome approaching, Rome was already living in their head. Chapter 7. The vine staff that ruled 80 men. Okay, this is the item that made a centurion completely different from every other rank in the Roman army, and most people skip right past it. The vites was a staff cut from a grapevine, roughly the length of a walking stick, and it gave a centurion the legal right to physically strike any soldier under his command on the spot for any infraction with no trial and no appeal. Seriously, late to formation, vites, dirty gear at inspection, vitis, breaking ranks on the march, vitis right there in front of everyone. Roman records actually include soldiers filing formal complaints against centurions who used it too enthusiastically, and one centurion reportedly earned a nickname from his own troops that translates to "give me another," because he kept snapping vine staffs across his men's backs and needed replacements constantly. I mean, imagine being so relentless that your nickname becomes a supply request. His men hated him and were terrified of him at exactly the same time, and that was precisely the point. The vites wasn't just a stick, it was discipline made physical, and in the Roman army, discipline wasn't optional. It was the whole foundation everything else was built on. Chapter 8. The sword. Centurions often carried the spatha instead of the standard gladius that regular legionaries used, mainly because it was longer. The gladius ran 18 to 24 inches and was built purely for thrusting in tight formations where there was no room to swing anything, while the spatha pushed 30 inches or more and gave extra reach for the wider variety of situations command kept putting a centurion in. Some still preferred the gladius inside the shield wall, but the method was the same with either blade: smash the scutum into the enemy's face to break his guard, drive the blade in, move to the next man. Fast, ugly, and completely effective. Roman sword fighting wasn't built to look impressive. It was built to end the fight before the other guy got another chance, and it worked well enough to help conquer most of the known world, so the approach clearly held up. Chapter 9. The dagger. The Pugio was the dagger on the left hip, and this thing had two totally different lives depending on the day. Most of the time it was just a camp tool, cutting food, trimming leather straps, scraping mud out of armor joints, fixing gear. In an actual fight, it only came out when everything had already gone completely sideways, and a soldier was on the ground in a desperate tangle where even a short sword was too long to be useful. In that situation, the Pugio was for the throat, the armpit, the gaps armor left exposed that a longer blade simply couldn't reach. Nobody wanted to be reaching for it in a fight, because needing it meant things had already gone very wrong, but that's exactly why every centurion carried it every single day. Chapter 10. The Shield. The scutum was large, curved, and rectangular, built from layers of glued wood covered in leather and reinforced with metal, and honestly, this might be the most important item on the whole list. In formation, overlapping shields turned individual men into a single continuous wall, and the testudo formation, where shields covered the front, sides, and top simultaneously, made a Roman unit basically impenetrable to anything coming from range. But here's what most people completely miss. The scutum was also an offensive weapon. The metal boss at the center, called the umbo, was the opening move in every close combat situation. Drive it into the enemy's face or throat, stagger him, break his guard open, and then bring the sword up into the gap. Shield first, sword second, and when hundreds of men ran that same rhythm together at the same time, being on the wrong end of it was genuinely terrifying. Chapter 11. The Javelin. The pilum was the Roman heavy javelin, around 6 feet long with a wooden shaft and a long iron shank ending in a pyramid point, and a centurion carried 2 of them. The clever part was the iron shank, which was deliberately made from soft metal so that when it punched through an enemy's shield on impact, the weight of the shaft bent it permanently and made it basically impossible to pull out. Now the enemy has a 6-foot bent javelin hanging off his shield that he can't use for defense and can't ignore, so his only real option is dropping the shield entirely. And a man charging Roman infantry without a shield is already done, he just doesn't know it yet. First volley at 30 paces, second at 15, drop the pilum and draw the sword. By the time the 2 sides actually made contact, the pilum had already won part of the fight. Chapter 12. The Marching Pack. Before a centurion could fight anyone, he had to march to them first, and Roman soldiers were not traveling light. The sarsana was the full marching load carried on a wooden pole called the furca, and enemies called Roman soldiers pack mules for hauling so much, which is pretty funny right up until those same pack mules build a fortified camp every night, sleep behind actual walls, and come out fighting fresh while you slept exposed in a field. The sagum, the heavy wool cloak, doubled as warmth and bedding since soldiers slept outdoors on campaign. A spare tunic was essential because marching 20 miles in soaked clothing was a reliable path to the kind of infection that historically killed more soldiers than enemy weapons ever did. The loculus satchel carried a sewing kit, a weapon and armor cleaning kit, personal items like letters from home or religious tokens, and almost certainly dice, because soldiers in every era of history are going to find time to gamble. The waterskin added another 5 to 6 pounds when full, and in hot weather, soldiers carried more than one. Chapter 13. The Food. Rations covered 3 days between resupply points, with grain as the main staple at around 3 pounds per day, carried dry and ground using a small hand mill shared across the 8-man tent group, with each man rotating who carried the millstone. On your rotation day, that added 15 to 20 extra pounds to an already brutal load. The grain became hard bread or porridge over a fire, alongside dried bacon, cheese, and posca, a vinegar and water drink that sounds genuinely terrible, but kept soldiers healthy by preventing the kind of intestinal illness that historically thinned ancient armies faster than enemy swords did. Add a small cooking pot and basic utensils and you start to realize a Roman soldier on campaign wasn't just carrying weapons. He was carrying his kitchen, his bed, his repair shop, and his entire survival system all at once. Chapter 14. The Tools. The dolabra was a military pickaxe with an axe head on one side and a pick on the other, used for breaking ground, cutting timber, and building the fortified camp that Roman soldiers put up at the end of every single day on campaign without exception. Alongside it came shovels, earth-moving baskets, and the sudis, 2 sharpened wooden stakes per soldier, driven into the camp palisade wall every single night. So, after marching 20 miles under full load, Roman soldiers still dug a ditch, raised a rampart, and built a defensive wall before they were allowed to sleep. Germanic enemies sleeping in open fields were waking up each morning facing an army that slept behind walls it had built with its own hands. The enemies mocking Roman soldiers as pack mules for carrying all of it were completely wrong about what it meant. The shovel wasn't just gear, it was the reason Rome was nearly impossible to catch off guard. Each soldier also carried his section of the shared 8-man leather tent, around 5 to 6 pounds per person, assembled nightly and functional for an entire campaign season when looked after properly. Chapter 15. The Total. All right, let's actually add this up. Armor around 30 pounds, weapons and shield another 35 to 40, and the full pack with rations, tools, stakes, tent section, and shared equipment rotations pushing another 40 to 50 pounds on top of all that. A fully equipped Centurion was consistently carrying over 100 pounds, often near 50 kilograms. He marched 20 miles a day under that load, oversaw camp construction at the end of every march, maintained discipline the whole way, and had to be ready to fight at any point with no warning. The enemies who called Roman soldiers pack mules weren't wrong about the weight. They just had no idea what those pack mules were capable of once they actually got where they were going. Which item do you think mattered most? The weapons that won the fight, the tools that built the camp every night, or the VTs that kept 80 men in line? Drop your answer in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed the breakdown, and subscribe for more military history.